I am a land claims clerk by trade and a careful man by nature. I write things down. I notice details other men wave past, a smudged signature, a boundary line drawn an inch too far east, the way a person's hands behave when they're trying to hold something together. So when Wren Calloway stepped through the door of my office on the third Tuesday of October, I noticed the tin. It was the size of a bread loaf and the color of old pennies. She carried it under one arm like a Bible she hadn't opened in a long while. Her other hand held a folded letter from a land office in Billings's, and her face had the particular stillness of a woman who has been traveling for days and has run out of anything to feel surprised about. She said she was looking for information on a property filing. Her parents, the Calloways of Billings, had died that August, 3 weeks apart, her mother first, and her father following, close behind in the way of long-married people who lose their footing when the other is gone. She was settling their affairs. I took the letter, checked my ledger, and found nothing. The Calloways had never filed anything in Cold Fork County. She thanked me without blinking, turned toward the door, and then stopped. Her hand rested a moment on the doorframe. Outside, the Cold Fork Main Street was doing its ordinary Tuesday business. A freight wagon, a dog asleep in the dust, 2 ranchers arguing about fence line in front of the hardware. Do you know anyone in this county named Salah Brightwater? I put my pen down. Salah Brightwater lived east of the Coldwater River, in the band led by her uncle, and had never in her life set foot in my office or any office in Cold Fork. She was Nez Perce. She was also, so far as anyone on this side of the river knew, the last of a particular family line. Her sister had left the band some 30 years back and never come home. I told Wren I knew the name. I asked her where she'd heard it. She set the tin on my counter and opened it. Inside, a beaded bracelet, blue and white, the kind the women east of the river make for their daughters. A small photograph of a young Nez Perce woman holding an infant, and a letter in her father's handwriting that began, "Wren, if you are reading this, we were cowards longer than we should have been." I read enough to understand. I set the letter down. I looked at Wren Calloway, her dark hair, her careful brown eyes, the way she'd been holding herself together since August. And I told her she'd want to talk to Ledge Morrow. She asked who that was. I told her he was a rancher, 12 miles north, and the only white man in Cold Fork County that the people east of the river trusted. I told her he'd grown up trading with them, spoke enough of the language to be useful, and had never once, in 23 years of doing business on both sides of the Coldwater, given anyone cause to regret it. She said she didn't want to impose on a stranger. I told her that east of the river, a woman without a guide didn't just impose, she got turned around and sent home. Or worse, she arrived at the wrong moment and did a damage that couldn't be undone. I told her the protocol was real and the stakes were real, and Ledge Morrow was the man. She asked me to write her a letter of introduction. I wrote 3 sentences. She folded it into her coat pocket, picked up the tin, and walked out into the Cold Fork afternoon. I watched her cross the street from my window. I thought about the letter her father had written. Then I thought about the 30 years Salah Brightwater had spent on the east side of the Coldwater, waiting. Without knowing she was waiting. That evening, word had moved through Cold Fork the way word does, like smoke through a keyhole. By morning there were opinions. Cold Fork had always had opinions about the territory east of the river. Most of them were wrong, and most of the people who held them had never crossed the Coldwater once in their lives. That had never stopped them. Wren came back to my office 2 days later. She'd been to Ledge Morrow's ranch. He'd listened to the whole thing without interrupting, she said, and then he'd been quiet for long enough that she'd started to wonder if she'd said something wrong. Then he told her he knew who Salah Brightwater was. He told her he needed 3 days to send word east before they rode in unannounced. He told her to come back Thursday. She asked me if she could sit in the corner of my office and work on her lesson plans while she waited. She was applying for the teaching position at the Cold Fork Schoolhouse, which had been empty since June. I said she could. She came every morning. She sat at the small table by the east window, graded nothing because she had no students yet, and read instead. Her father's letter, over and over, though she never cried in front of me. She asked me questions about the county. I answered them. By Wednesday, I had told her more about Cold Fork than I had told anyone in 10 years, which surprised me somewhat. Thursday, she was gone before I opened. Ledge told me about the ride later. In the spare way, he told everything. 2 hours east to the river crossing at Harnett Ford, another hour into the territory. The October grass yellow and the sky the color of pewter. He said Wren didn't talk much. He said she held the tin in her lap the whole way, both hands flat on the lid. The camp was set back from a creek bend. The tip is pale against the cottonwoods, smoke rising in slow lines from 2 or 3 fires. A dog trotted out to meet the horses and then lost interest. A woman hanging elk hide on a frame looked up and looked away. Ledge dismounted at a particular distance from the edge of camp, not too close, not too far, and stood with his reins in his hands in the way of a man who has done this before and knows the shape of it. Wren dismounted beside him and did the same. A man named Crowstep met them at the edge. The elder who'd taken Ledge's trading honestly over the years and given him the kind of standing that can't be bought, only built. Ledge explained in what language he could, and Crowstep listened without expression, and then he sent a boy to find Sala Brightwater. Ledge said she came out of the trees, it's like she'd been expecting it. She was 60 or near it, her hair silver black, her face carrying the particular composure of a woman who has had 30 years to make peace with an unanswered question. She looked at Wren and did not speak. Wren, to her credit, did not speak either. She opened the tin and held out the bracelet. Sala Brightwater took it, turned it over once, pressed it briefly to her collarbone. Then she said something in Nez Perce. Ledge translated it for me later, in that same spare way. My sister made this for her daughter. I thought it was lost. Wren told me afterward that she did not remember sitting down, but she must have, because Ledge told me she was sitting on a flat rock by the creek, and Sala was sitting beside her, and they were there for 2 hours, while Crowstep's people moved around them with the ordinary business of the afternoon, and nobody made them feel like a problem to be solved. What Sala told her I only know in pieces, because Wren told it in pieces, over weeks, as she settled into Cold Fork. Her mother had been 17 when she left the band, not cast out, not disowned, but gone, following a man she loved, a white man from the eastern settlements who meant well and was frightened. They'd made a life in Billings. They'd made Wren. And when it became clear that the world they'd landed in was not kind to a mixed child, they'd made a choice that was part protection and part fear, and had spent 30 years not quite forgiving themselves for it. The bracelet had been her mother's. She'd sewn it into the lining of a coat before she died, and the Callaways had found it when Wren's father was going through her things, and he had carried it in his dresser drawer for 11 years, before he wrote the letter. Sala asked to see the photograph. She looked at it for a long time. She kept it. Wren asked if she could come back. Sala said yes. She rode back with Ledge in the late afternoon, the light going amber on the grass, the tin lighter now, the photograph gone. Something else in its place that I won't name here because it wasn't mine to know. Ledge said she was quiet again, but a different kind of quiet than the morning. He said it was the quiet of a woman who had just been handed back something she hadn't known was missing. He brought her back to Cold Fork. He did not rush. I think that matters. She got the teaching position in November. 16 children, grades 1 through 6, in a building that smelled of chalk and cold mornings, and had a stove that needed coaxing. She was good at it. The children took to her, the way children take to teachers who mean what they say. She went east of the river on her days off. Ledge took her twice more, and then Crowstep's people sent a rider to tell her she knew the way well enough to come on her own, which was its own kind of welcome. She and Sala spent the winter learning each other. The language in small pieces, the beadwork, the way Sala's face moved when she talked about Wren's mother. I know this because Wren told me. She told me a great many things that winter, stopping in on her way to or from wherever she was going. Ledge stopped in more too. He'd always picked up his mail in my office once a week, set down his fee, and left without much additional business. That winter he lingered. He asked after the schoolhouse. He asked after Wren, with the studied indirection of a man who has something to ask and is taking a long way around to asking it. I told him she was well. I told him she came in on Thursdays. He started coming in on Thursdays. I am a careful man, and I noticed. What happened between them happened the way the best things do, slowly, plainly, with no drama worth recording. He helped her get a better stove fitted in the schoolhouse. She patched a tear in his coat that he'd been ignoring since September. He rode east with her twice more in the new year. Not because she needed a guide anymore, but because she asked him to, and he went because he wanted to. And somewhere in the space between those two true things, the arrangement became something neither of them had a name for, until the day in February when Ledge Morrow came to my office and asked me to write letter to the county seat on his behalf. I asked what for. He said he intended to ask Ren Calloway to marry him, and he wanted to make sure the paperwork was in order first. I told him that was the most him thing I had ever heard. He said he'd take that as a yes. He put his hat back on, picked up his mail, and walked out. At the door, he stopped, the same way Ren had stopped at that door back in October, looking at nothing in particular. Then he said she's going to want to keep teaching after. I want that on record somewhere, that I know it and I'm for it. I told him I'd note it. He left. I sat there for a moment with my pen in my hand. She said yes on a Wednesday, beside the creek at Harnett Ford, with the ice still breaking up along the shallows, and Sala bright water, watching from the bank. Sala gave her a new bracelet, blue and white, the kind made for a daughter. Ren wore it to the church in Cold Fork the following April when they married. Quiet, short, 16 children sitting in the pews like a small congregation of chaos. Crowstep standing at the back in the good coat he wore only for matters of weight. Cold Fork had its opinions, same as always, most of them softened by June. People have a way of revising their opinions when a woman teaches their children well, and a man runs his ranch, honestly, and neither of them asks permission for a thing. I signed as witness at the land office when they filed the joint claim on the Morrow property. Ren's hand was steady. Ledge stood beside her, with his hat in his hands, and watched her sign her name like it was worth watching. I wrote it down because that's what I do. I've thought about it often since. A locked tin and a woman who didn't know what was in it until she was 31 years old. The bracelet, the photograph. The 30 years Sala spent across the river without knowing if her sister's child was alive. And the particular way that things long buried have of finding their way to the light, eventually, if someone is willing to make the ride. Ledge Morrow made the ride. That's the whole of it.